I'm glad you're here because today we're exploring a moment that almost nobody discusses. The precise psychological shock that strikes a narcissist the instant they realize you didn't pursue them. They expected panicked tears and desperate apologies. They assumed you would crumble before they ever had to, yet instead you chose silence. And that silence didn't just catch them off guard. It dismantled the reality they created around controlling you. If you've ever felt guilty for leaving or questioned whether your silence had any impact, understand this. It mattered more than any argument, any explanation, or any emotional closure you could have provided. Narcissists aren't afraid of being disliked. They are terrified of being overlooked. They survive on reactions, any reaction at all, and your refusal to participate in their game strikes at the center of their identity. When they left, they didn't leave with certainty or pride. They left with expectation, convinced you would chase after them, call them, message them, and fight to keep them, because that is what their past experiences reinforced. People always pursued them. People always came back. And you were meant to follow that same storyline. They didn't leave to end the relationship. They left to test something within you. They wanted to measure your loyalty, your reliance, and your emotional exposure. They needed reassurance that you feared losing them more than they feared losing you. This belief forms the base of their entire control dynamic. But the instant you refuse to play your part, the instant you didn't crumble, the instant you didn't plead for their return, their illusion fractured. Because for the first time, they had to face a frightening possibility. What if you were never as dependent as they imagined? Your silence was never just absence. To them, it felt like defiance. It felt like betrayal. It represented the collapse of a carefully crafted illusion where they always maintained dominance. You didn't simply ignore them. You disrupted the invisible force they believed would always pull you back. And this is where the situation turns darker. Narcissists rely heavily on predictability. They mentally script your behavior long before you speak or act. But when you refuse to chase them, you became unpredictable. And unpredictability threatens their sense of control. Narcissists rarely collapse when relationships end. They collapse when their narrative falls apart. The breakup itself holds little significance. Your reaction or your lack of reaction holds absolute significance, because if they cannot predict you, they cannot manipulate you. And if they cannot manipulate you, they lose the emotional reinforcement that feeds their ego. Right now, whether you realize it or not, your silence has likely pushed them into psychological turmoil. They reread old messages, revisit past arguments, monitor your social platforms, and wrestle with the question haunting them day and night. How did they lose control? Stay with me, because in the next section we will examine what unfolds inside their mind during this unraveling. The fear, the anger, the obsessive thinking, and the frantic attempts to reshape the story so they can avoid confronting reality. Your resilience exposed. Chapter R, psychological collapse. When you refused to chase, the narcissist didn't only feel shocked, they felt unmasked. Every narcissist carries a delicate internal belief system built on illusions of superiority and desirability. Your silence threatens that illusion at its core. Suddenly, they begin struggling to determine whether their perceived value was authentic or artificially constructed. Their first response is denial. They convince themselves you are pretending to be distant or attempting to emotionally punish them. They reassure themselves that nobody leaves them willingly. It must be a reaction, never a decision. because if it were a decision, it would suggest they weren't worthy enough to stay for. Then confusion takes over. Narcissists depend on predictable patterns, and you disrupted one. In their mindset, love is equated with control. Connection is equated with compliance. Distance is equated with pursuit, but you overturn the formula. Your silence became proof that their psychological blueprint of you was inaccurate, and that threatens their entire sense of dominance. After the confusion fades, anxiety begins to surface. Narcissists struggle deeply with uncertainty. They require clear answers, assurance of influence, and defined status. When you remain unresponsive, their mind starts constructing stories, often unsettling ones. Are they involved with someone else? Did they replace me? Were they pretending all along? That anxiety quickly evolves into fixation. The narcissist begins revisiting every interaction, every moment of vulnerability they displayed, every instance where they believe that they search desperately for something, anything that explains why you didn't collapse. And this is where the irony strikes them. They start to recognize that you possessed more resilience than they ever considered possible. Narcissists resent strong partners. Strength suggests independence. Independence suggests unpredictability. And unpredictability means they cannot depend on you as a source of emotional reinforcement. Their ego begins to murmur their most painful fear. What if I wasn't as important as I believed? What if I misjudged everything? That single thought terrifies them more than losing you ever could. It threatens their fragile sense of value, which was never secure from the start. To escape this fear, the narcissist shifts toward blame. You become distant, you become heartless, you become unappreciative. They reconstruct the story so they appear as the victim, because it is the only way to avoid the reflection your strength forces them to confront. Playing the victim briefly but the illusion fades quickly because beneath that blame, a darker emotion begins to grow. Anger, not ordinary anger, but entitlement-driven fury. The kind that emerges from losing control over something they believed emotionally belonged to them. And this is where we reach the pivotal moment. Because this anger doesn't remain internal, it transforms into a frantic attempt to draw you back into their orbit, even if it means abandoning every principle they once claimed to follow. Now we move to chapter 3, the turning point. This is the stage where the narcissist realizes something they never prepared themselves to accept. You are not returning. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever in the way they anticipated. And this realization strikes them like a freezing blade against their ego, because rejection is not merely painful for a narcissist, it feels existential. It signals that they no longer control the narrative, and that loss of authority over the story is unbearable. So the narcissist does what they instinctively do when panic builds. They attempt to reverse the dynamic. They begin subtly, liking old photographs, viewing your stories, or asking shared acquaintances about you. These actions serve as entry points, tests, small hooks cast into the water to see whether you will respond. It is not affection, it is surveillance. When subtle methods fail, they intensify their approach. You might receive an unexpected message, something neutral enough to conceal their real intention. Hey, how have you been? Just wanted to check in. Hope you're doing well. Beneath those words, however, is an unspoken plea. React to me, acknowledge me. Prove that I still hold significance. And when you either remain silent or respond calmly, something within them fractures. They are unaccustomed to being ignored. They are accustomed to controlling the pace of the relationship, but now you control the rhythm. You determine the tempo, and that shift unsettles them deeply. You have taken the very resource they rely upon, your emotional accessibility. This is when they begin reconstructing history, not only for themselves, but for anyone willing to listen. Suddenly, they were the devoted partner. Suddenly, they were misunderstood. Suddenly, you became the one who changed. They design a narrative where they maintain control because the truth that you chose to leave independently is too threatening for them to accept. If rewriting the past fails to draw you back, they advance to the next phase, provocation. They may share photos carefully chosen to spark a response. They might openly engage with someone new or display happiness they don't genuinely feel. It isn't authentic. It's a lure. They want you to shatter your silence. They want you to falter. They crave confirmation that they still influence your emotions. But when you remain composed, when you don't react, don't pursue, and don't unravel, you create something narcissists rarely confront: self-doubt. They begin questioning whether you truly saw through them, whether you finally recognized the emotional leverage they depended on. That doubt corrodes their manufactured confidence. Then comes the most theatrical shift. They attempt to artificially recreate intimacy. They might offer vague apologies, suggest they miss you, or imply they have changed. But don't mistake this for growth. It is not transformation, it is calculation. It is their final effort to restore a dynamic where your dependence on them outweighs their dependence on you. And when these tactics fail, when your silence persists, when your peace becomes visible, when your emotional distance feels permanent, the narcissist experiences something they never anticipated: fear. Not fear of losing you, but fear of losing the identity they maintained only when they felt superior to you. That fear signals the start of their internal collapse. And the ecosystem of their ego cannot function without control, and your refusal to chase exposes how fragile they have always been beneath their facade. In the next chapter, we examine what happens when that facade finally fractures. Chapter 4, Collapse and Consequences. This is the stage where everything begins to unravel for the narcissist. The moment they accept that you are not returning, not to justify yourself, not to comfort them, not to reinforce their ego, the foundation beneath them shifts. What they feel is not heartbreak. It is ego disintegration. Without your emotional responses, they lose a critical part of their identity, the part that thrived on directing your attention. They start revisiting old conversations, not because they miss you, but because they are searching for evidence that they once held control. They scroll through messages, analyzing every compliment you offered, hunting for signs of dominance. Yet instead of reassurance, they encounter silence, your silence, and it unsettles them more deeply than anything else. Soon, paranoia emerges. Did you replace them? Did someone else recognize your value? Did you uncover their manipulative patterns? They don't fear losing you as an individual. They fear losing you as a resource, a mirror, a source of emotional reinforcement. When they cannot answer these questions, uncertainty eats away at them like slow, corrosive acid. That uncertainty drives them toward desperation. They begin performing for an audience, any audience. They post more frequently, boast more aggressively, exaggerate their success. They need the world to believe they are flourishing without you. But every staged grin, every filtered photograph, every forced display of joy is secretly directed at you. Notice me. Acknowledge me. But you remain silent. And that absence devastates them because they never imagined you would maintain your silence for this long. They never expected you to rebuild yourself. They never imagined you would grow stronger. In their mind, you were always meant to collapse first. And now, for the first time, they confront a version of you they cannot anticipate. Their internal world becomes disordered. They struggle to sleep. They obsessively analyze memories. They replay fantasies where you pursue them, plead with them, fight to keep them, because that imagined outcome, but reality overpowers their fantasies. You didn't chase, you chose to leave. And that single decision rewrites the entire narrative. This realization triggers something rare within a narcissist: regret. Not moral regret, not empathy-driven remorse, but calculated regret. They regret losing access to someone who genuinely cares. They regret misjudgment. They regret believing you would always remain. And by the time they arrive at this stage, the narcissist becomes emotionally unfamiliar, even to themselves. They swing between resentment and yearning, arrogance and emptiness, rejection and desire. All of it funnels toward one crushing realization they never imagined confronting. You hold the control now, and they cannot reclaim it. Chapter 5, Final Truth and Healing. This is the part they never intended for you to recognize. Once the narcissist understands you are truly gone, they begin reconstructing the entire relationship in their mind. Not to honor it, but to endure it. They transform your strength into cruelty, your silence into betrayal, your recovery into evidence that you never cared. This distortion shields them from acknowledging the truth that they lost someone they cannot replace. Yet beneath layers of denial and inflated pride, something else begins to form. A quiet fear, not fear of you returning or confronting them, but fear of being forgotten. Narcissists dread disappearing from someone's emotional universe. Your ability to move forward becomes the one reality they cannot accept, because it forces them to confront how limited their influence truly was, and the strangest reality emerges. Your peace becomes their suffering. Every sign that you are improving, your happiness, your composure, your emotional stability, becomes a reminder of the one thing they failed to break: your resilience. They expected your world to collapse without them. Instead, it expanded. That contradiction strikes them like a psychological shockwave. The narcissist begins imagining alternate versions of the past, timelines where you pursued them, pleaded with them, and fell apart without them. This is comfort them briefly. But reality, the version where you chose yourself over their turmoil, cuts deeper than they will ever confess. Your strength reshapes the story they built around their own identity. And although they will never voice it, your silence becomes a reflection they cannot avoid. It forces them to question their charm, their influence, their supposed ability to dominate. For someone whose identity depends entirely on superiority, this fracture in their illusion is devastating. It threatens the persona they spent years constructing, but this is where healing begins for you. Recognizing that their fixation has nothing to do with your value as a person. It reflects their inability to confront internal emptiness. You didn't linger in their mind because you were fragile. You linger because you disrupted the pattern. You stepped away from the gravitational pull of their ego. And that is something they can neither excuse nor erase. Life has an unusual way of restoring balance. The pain they once caused returns to them not as revenge, but as consequence. They experience loss in slow, delayed waves long after your wounds have healed. By the time they understand what they lost, you are already standing in a new chapter of your life, looking back with understanding. And here lies the final twist. They may attempt to return someday, not out of love or personal growth, but out of emptiness. Narcissists often return when their alternatives fade, when new attention fails, when reality becomes too heavy to carry alone. But if they return, they will not encounter the same version of you they once controlled. Because the moment you stopped chasing them, you changed. You stopped being their emotional captive and became the one thing they never anticipated. The person who endured them. Your resilience, your silence, your recovery all transform into your freedom. And nothing unsettles a narcissist more than someone they can no longer influence. Balance. So here is the truth you deserve to hold on to. Their shock became your awakening. Their loss became your beginning. Their expectations were restraints, but your refusal to beg shattered those restraints into fragments. You walked away from their disorder and created something they will never comprehend: peace. And that peace will linger in their thoughts, far longer than they ever lingered in yours.